My husband's wine glass hit the marble floor with a sharp crack. The entire ballroom went silent. A tall man in a dark suit, our company's new billionaire owner, was standing inches from me, staring like he'd just seen a ghost. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "After 28 years, I finally found you, Claire Harper." My maiden name. No one in that room knew that name anymore. Certainly not the hundreds of executives, investors, and social climbers gathered under the glittering chandeliers of the Hilton Columbus downtown ballroom. And definitely not my husband, Daniel Mitchell. Daniel was still staring at the spreading red stain on the floor where his Cabernet had spilled. His mouth hung open. For a second, he looked like a man who had forgotten how to breathe. I didn't blame him, because I was just as stunned. But to understand how I ended up standing in that ballroom with the richest man in the room looking at me like I was the most important person there, you have to go back a few hours. Earlier that evening, Daniel was gripping the steering wheel of his black Lexus RX 350 like he was driving into battle. Fleetwood Mac played softly through the speakers, the same classic rock station he always listened to. The sky over Columbus had already turned dark, and the streets were slick from a light autumn rain. Daniel checked himself in the rearview mirror for the third time in 5 minutes, adjusting his tie. "Just remember what I said," he muttered. I sat beside him quietly, smoothing the skirt of the navy dress I'd worn to 3 different weddings over the last 5 years. "What exactly did you say?" I asked. He sighed the way he always did when he thought I was being difficult. "Claire, please, tonight matters." I turned my head toward the window. The city lights blurred past in yellow streaks. "I know it matters," I said. "No," he replied quickly, "you don't." He glanced at me. "Just smile. Don't start conversations, don't tell long stories, and for God's sake don't bring up the hospital stuff." The hospital stuff. That's how he referred to the 15 years I spent working as an emergency room nurse. I nodded once. "I'll behave," I said. Daniel relaxed a little. "This is a big night for the company," he continued. "The new owner is worth billions. Tech guy, built some logistics empire, bought our whole operation last month." "I remember," I said. "You don't understand how important it is to make a good impression." "I won't embarrass you." He didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, almost under his breath, "Just don't talk too much." That line landed harder than he probably meant it to. Because it wasn't the first time I'd heard it. Not even close. 25 years of marriage teaches you which comments are casual, and which ones come from somewhere deeper. I stared out the window again and watched the rain streak down the glass. The Hilton came into view a few minutes later, bright and polished against the dark street. Daniel pulled into the valet line. The doorman opened my door and the cool October air hit my face. Inside the lobby, everything smelled faintly of lilies and expensive perfume. The ballroom doors were already open. Music floated out, soft jazz played by a live trio near the stage. Hundreds of people were inside. Men in tailored suits, women in sleek dresses and sparkling jewelry. The kind of event where everyone pretends they're relaxed while quietly measuring everyone else's success. Daniel immediately shifted into what I call his corporate voice. Louder, sharper, confident. He shook hands, clapped backs, laughed a little too hard at jokes. I followed beside him, smiling politely. At one point, he introduced me to a co-worker. "Greg, this is my wife Claire," he said. Greg nodded. "Nice to meet you," Daniel added almost casually. "She used to be a nurse." "Used to?" Like it was something small I'd tried years ago and then quit. I just smiled. We found our assigned table near the middle of the ballroom. Crystal glasses, white linens, little name cards. Daniel immediately leaned toward me. "Remember," he whispered, "the owner will probably make rounds. Just keep it simple if he talks to us." I nodded again. Around us, the room buzzed with conversation. Wine glasses clinked. Waiters carried trays of steak and roasted vegetables. The air smelled like garlic butter and money. Then suddenly the music softened, and the room began to shift. People were turning toward the entrance. "The owner's here," someone murmured. A tall man walked into the ballroom, surrounded by a few executives. Late 40s maybe, calm posture, dark suit without a tie. He didn't look flashy, but everyone watched him like gravity had changed. "Ethan Caldwell," Daniel whispered. I had seen his picture once in a company newsletter. Tech billionaire. Built a logistics platform that revolutionized supply chains. Recently bought Daniel's company outright. Executives immediately began lining up to greet him. Daniel straightened his jacket. "Okay," he said quietly, "just stay here." He stepped forward slightly, positioning himself near the aisle where Ethan would likely walk. I stayed at the table, watching. Ethan shook a few hands politely. Then something strange happened. He looked past the executives, past the managers, past Daniel. His eyes moved across the room, slowly, searching. Then they landed on me, and he stopped walking. For a moment he didn't move at all. The conversation around us softened as he stepped away from the group. He walked straight through the tables, toward me. I remember thinking he must be heading somewhere else. But he kept coming, closer, until he was standing right in front of me. Up close, his face looked different from the photos. Older, sharper, but his eyes carried something else. Recognition. He leaned forward slightly, and spoke softly enough that only I could hear. "After 28 years, I finally found you." Then he said the name I hadn't heard in decades. "Claire Harper." Behind me, something shattered. Daniel's wine glass hit the floor. The sound echoed through the ballroom. And when I turned around, my husband looked like his entire world had just tilted sideways. Because the richest man in the room wasn't looking at him. He was looking at me. And in that moment, I had no idea why. But I was about to find out. Ethan Caldwell didn't look away from me. Not even when several executives hurried over, clearly confused about why the owner of their newly purchased company had stopped in the middle of the ballroom. Daniel stepped closer to the table, still pale. He glanced between me and Ethan like he was trying to solve a math problem that suddenly had too many numbers. "Mr. Caldwell," Daniel said quickly, forcing a smile. "Good evening. I'm Daniel Mitchell, Operations Manager." Ethan nodded politely, but his attention stayed on me. "You used to work at Austin Medical Center," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. My throat tightened. "Yes," I said. He exhaled slowly like a man who had finally finished a very long search. I knew it. The room around us kept moving. Conversation started again, music resumed, but inside that small circle around our table, everything felt strangely still. Daniel tried again. "So, you two know each other?" Ethan finally turned toward him. "We met a long time ago." Daniel laughed lightly the way people do when they're nervous. "Well, small world," he said. Ethan's expression didn't change. "Yes," he replied, "very small." He looked back at me. "You were working the night shift," he continued. "Emergency room, summer of 1995. The words pulled something loose in my memory. Austin. Heat, long hospital nights, fluorescent lights that never seemed to turn off, and one particular night that had started like any other. "I remember," I said slowly. Ethan smiled faintly. "Good," he said, "because I've spent almost 3 decades hoping I'd find you again." Daniel shifted beside me. "Wait," he said, "you're telling me you two met in a hospital?" Ethan nodded. "That's right." He pulled out a chair and sat down at our table without asking something no one else in that ballroom would have dared to do. And suddenly 28 years disappeared. Austin, Texas. I was 23 years old and working night shifts at Austin Medical Center while finishing nursing school. The hospital always smelled the same after midnight. Antiseptic. Coffee that had been sitting on a burner too long. The faint metallic scent of blood that never fully left the emergency room. It had been raining that night. Hard. The kind of Texas storm that floods the streets in minutes. Around 12:40 a.m., the ambulance doors burst open. 2 paramedics rushed in pushing a stretcher. Male mid-20s, one of them called out. Car accident, internal bleeding, possible spleen rupture. The man on the stretcher was barely conscious. Blood covered his shirt. I remember the way his hand twitched as they rolled him inside. The ER doctor took one quick look at the chart. "No insurance?" he asked. The paramedic shook his head. The doctor sighed. "Stabilize him and prepare a transfer." Transfers happened more than people realize. Hospitals moved uninsured patients to public facilities when surgeries got expensive. But something about the way that young man looked at me stopped me cold. Fear. Pure quiet fear. I leaned closer to the doctor. "His blood pressure's dropping," I said. "He may not survive a transfer." The doctor hesitated. "Claire. Just run the scan," I insisted. "If his spleen's ruptured, he needs surgery now." The doctor studied me for a second, then nodded. Fine, let's confirm. The scan took 10 minutes. It confirmed everything. Ruptured spleen. Severe internal bleeding. Emergency surgery. The operating room team rushed him upstairs. Most nurses would have gone home when their shift ended. Mine ended at 2 in the morning. But I stayed. I sat in the waiting area while the surgeons worked. 3 hours later, the doctor came out. "He'll make it," he said. Relief washed over me. The young man woke up later that morning. Weak. Confused. I was checking his IV when his eyes opened. "You stayed," he whispered. I shrugged. "Someone should." He tried to laugh but winced instead. "Do I owe you money?" he asked. "No," I said. "You saved my life." "You saved it," I replied. "I just did my job." He asked my name. "Claire," I told him. "Claire Harper," he repeated slowly like he wanted to remember it. 2 days later, he was transferred to another hospital for recovery. We never saw each other again. Or at least, that's what I thought. Back in the Hilton ballroom, Ethan leaned back in his chair. "I looked for you," he said. "For years." Daniel blinked. "You looked for my wife." Ethan nodded. Hospital records from the 90s weren't exactly digital. The trail disappeared. "So what changed?" I asked quietly. Ethan's expression shifted slightly. "When I bought your husband's company," he said. Daniel straightened a little at that. "Yes, well, we're all very excited about the acquisition." Ethan raised a hand, gently stopping him. "I started reviewing employee records." He turned back toward me. And I saw a name attached to an emergency contact form. Claire Harper. My maiden name. "I couldn't believe it," he said. Daniel forced a laugh again. "Well, that's incredible timing." Ethan looked at him calmly. "Yes," he said, "it is." Then he leaned forward slightly. "May I ask you something, Claire?" "Of course." His voice softened. "Are you happy?" The question landed harder than I expected. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside me. "Of course she is," he answered quickly. "We've been married 25 years. Ethan didn't look at him. He was still watching me. Waiting. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because the truth wasn't simple. There had been good years. Family dinners. Road trips. Quiet Sundays. But somewhere along the way, something had changed. Daniel had become sharper, colder. Success had turned into status. And I had slowly turned into background. "I'm fine," I finally said. Ethan studied my face for a moment. Then he nodded once. "Good," he said. But something in his eyes told me he didn't quite believe it. Across the ballroom, someone tapped a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice announced. "If we could have your attention for a moment." The music stopped again. People turned toward the stage. Ethan stood up slowly. "Looks like they want me," he said. Daniel jumped to his feet. "Mr. Caldwell, before you go, I'd love to schedule time to discuss the logistics platform improvements my team built." Ethan paused. "Your team built?" Daniel nodded confidently. "Yes, the optimization system we rolled out in 2018. It's been one of the company's biggest innovations." Ethan's face stayed perfectly neutral. "Has it?" he said. "Yes," Daniel replied proudly. Ethan nodded slowly. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "That's interesting." He buttoned his jacket. "Because I've been reviewing the original design files." Daniel blinked. "Well, yes, of course." Ethan looked at him calmly. "And according to those files," he said, "the system wasn't designed by you." A quiet tension slipped into the space between us. Daniel laughed again, but this time the sound was thinner. "Of course it was a team effort." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Was it?" Daniel didn't answer. Ethan turned toward the stage. "I think tonight might be a good opportunity to talk about that." Then he looked back at me one last time and said softly, "You deserve to hear the truth, too." As he walked away toward the microphone, something deep in my chest tightened, because I suddenly had the strangest feeling that whatever was about to happen on that stage was going to change far more than just a company speech. For the next section, I will continue the story, keeping the pacing fast and the emotional arc consistent with parts 1 to 2. I will also avoid repeating key motifs and keep the dialogue natural. Claire Harper. I hadn't heard that name spoken out loud in years, not like that, not in a room full of strangers wearing $1,000 suits. The MC handed Ethan the microphone. He stood at the center of the stage beneath the chandelier lights, relaxed like he had done this 1,000 times. "Good evening, everyone," he said. His voice carried easily through the ballroom. "I appreciate all of you coming tonight." Polite applause followed. Daniel leaned close to me. "This is good," he whispered. "If he highlights the logistics system tonight, that's huge for us." For us. I didn't answer. My eyes stayed fixed on Ethan. Something about his tone earlier had shifted the air in the room. It was subtle, but I could feel it. Like the quiet moment before a summer storm finally breaks. Ethan continued speaking. "This company has accomplished a lot over the years. Growth, innovation, strong leadership." Daniel nodded beside me like each word was written for him personally. "But when I acquire a company," Ethan went on, "I always start by asking one question." He paused. "Who actually built the foundation?" A few people murmured politely. Daniel straightened his shoulders. "Tonight," Ethan said, "I'd like to recognize one of the most important technical breakthroughs this company ever implemented." The room brightened with attention. The logistics optimization system introduced about 5 years ago. Daniel inhaled sharply. I could almost hear the pride swelling inside him. "That platform changed how freight moves across half the Midwest," Ethan continued. Several executives nodded. Daniel leaned closer to me. "That's it," he whispered. "That's my project." I felt a strange tightness in my chest. Because something about the way Ethan was speaking didn't sound like praise. It sounded like preparation. Ethan glanced toward our table. "Daniel Mitchell," he said. My husband stood instantly. The room applauded politely as Daniel walked toward the stage. He shook Ethan's hand with confident enthusiasm. Daniel had always been good at public moments. He thrived in them. Ethan stepped slightly aside. "Daniel," he said, "why don't you tell everyone how this system came together?" Daniel adjusted the microphone. Well, he began with a smooth smile. "It started as a small efficiency project in 2017. My team and I saw an opportunity to improve route prediction algorithms." I had heard this speech before. Different rooms, different audiences, but always the same version. Daniel describing the late nights, the innovation, the breakthrough moment. The story had grown more polished over the years. The room listened politely. A few executives nodded with interest. Ethan stood quietly beside him. Then he raised a hand. "Daniel," he said. Daniel paused. "Yes. Just a quick technical question." Daniel smiled. "Of course." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "In the original architecture, why did you choose a 3-layer forecasting model instead of a 2-layer predictive engine?" Daniel blinked. "Well, the optimization benefits were significant." Ethan waited. Daniel shifted his weight. "The routing variables needed additional—" Ethan nodded slowly. "Interesting." He reached behind him. A screen lit up above the stage. Rows of text appeared. Code. Project documentation. The title line at the top read, "Harper Logistics Forecasting System Initial Design." My breath caught. "Harper." The room grew quiet. Ethan stepped closer to the microphone. According to the archived design files, he said calmly, "This system was first created in 2005. Daniel cleared his throat. "Well, yes, the early concept stage." Ethan continued. "By a software engineer named Mark Harper." The name hit me like a physical blow. My brother. My older brother, Mark. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything else. Just the memory of Mark sitting at the kitchen table years ago, laptop open, talking excitedly about a new routing system he was building. "I think this could change freight logistics," he had told me once. I blinked hard, trying to focus on the stage. Daniel was staring at the screen. "That was a preliminary prototype," he said quickly. Ethan didn't raise his voice. Then why, he asked calmly, "Do all of the core algorithms in the final system match Mark Harper's original source code?" A ripple of whispers moved through the ballroom. Daniel's smile tightened. "It was a collaborative effort." Ethan clicked a small remote. Another document appeared. An email. Dated May 14th, 2005. From Mark Harper. To Daniel Mitchell. Subject Final Architecture. Ethan read aloud. "Dan, here's the completed forecasting structure. I think this version finally works. Let's roll it out together once management approves." The room was very quiet now. Daniel's face had gone pale. That email doesn't show the full story, he said. Ethan looked at him evenly. Doesn't it? He clicked again. Another line of text appeared. This time from inside the code itself. A comment Mark had left at the top of one of the algorithm files. It read, "Built with encouragement from my sister Claire. She always told me to build things that help people." My chest tightened. I hadn't known Mark left that message. Ethan lowered the remote. "Daniel," he said calmly, "would you like to explain why your name replaced Mark Harper's on the final release documents 3 years later?" Daniel opened his mouth. Closed it. The silence stretched. Someone near the back of the room whispered something. Another executive pulled out a phone. Daniel's voice finally came out thin. "This is being misrepresented." Ethan nodded slightly. "Yes," he said. "It was." He turned toward the audience. "The man who built this system passed away in 2018. My throat tightened. His name, Ethan continued, was Mark Harper. Every pair of eyes in the ballroom slowly turned toward me. Daniel followed their gaze. And in that moment I watched the realization hit him. Because everyone could now see the connection. Claire Harper. Mark Harper. My husband's career had been built on my brother's work. Ethan spoke again. "Daniel Mitchell," he said calmly. "You're terminated effective immediately." The words landed like a hammer. Gasps broke across the room. 2 security staff stepped toward the stage. Daniel looked around wildly. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You can't just—" Ethan met his eyes. "I just did." Security gently touched Daniel's arm. For the first time in 25 years of marriage, my husband looked completely powerless. And strangely, I felt nothing. No anger. No triumph. Just a quiet sense that something long overdue had finally happened. Ethan turned back toward the audience. "One more thing," he said. He looked directly at me. "The reason I found this truth tonight is because of the woman sitting in this room." The ballroom followed his gaze again. Toward my table. Toward me. I suddenly realized I was about to become the center of attention in a room full of strangers. And for once, I wasn't afraid of it. Ethan Caldwell stood quietly at the microphone for a moment while the room tried to process what had just happened. Daniel was still on the edge of the stage, arguing in a low voice with the 2 security men who had approached him. I could hear fragments of his protest. "This is a misunderstanding. You can't fire someone like this. I've worked here for 20 years. But no one in the audience was looking at him anymore. They were looking at the screen. At Mark's name. At me. Ethan let the silence stretch just long enough for the truth to settle in. Then he spoke again. "The system that transformed this company's logistics network wasn't created by the man who just took credit for it," he said. "It was created by an engineer named Mark Harper." My brother's name echoed through the ballroom. I swallowed hard. For years, Mark had been gone. Cancer took him slowly in the spring of 2018. Even at the end, he kept working on that program. Said he believed it could help companies move freight more efficiently, reduce wasted fuel, cut down on empty trucks crossing the country. Typical Mark, always thinking about how things could be better. I never knew the final version of his work carried someone else's name. Ethan continued. "Mark Harper passed away 6 years ago. But the platform he designed still runs half this company's operations." A murmur rolled across the room. He turned slightly and gestured toward my table. "And his sister," he said, "is sitting right there." For a second I thought about disappearing under the tablecloth. Instead I slowly stood. A few people nearby gasped quietly as the connection became obvious. Daniel saw it too. His expression shifted from anger to something closer to fear. Ethan spoke again, this time looking directly at me. "Claire Harper," he said. The sound of my maiden name filled the room again. "You may not know this, but your brother's work changed this company, and tonight it deserves to be recognized properly." The ballroom remained silent. Then Ethan added something that surprised me. "There's another reason I wanted to recognize Mark's legacy tonight." He paused. "Because the person who inspired him to build that system once saved my life." Several people turned toward me again. I felt heat rise in my face. Ethan gave a small nod. 28 years ago, a young ER nurse in Austin refused to send an uninsured patient away when every rule said she should. A few executives exchanged glances. That nurse stayed after her shift ended. She convinced a surgeon to operate. She made sure that patient survived the night. He looked at me gently. That nurse was Claire Harper. For a moment, the entire ballroom was completely still. Then someone near the back started clapping. One pair of hands. Then another. Within seconds, the sound spread across the room. Applause filled the space. I stood there stunned while the noise rolled through the crowd like a wave. Not the polite applause executives usually give speeches. Real applause. The kind people give when something feels genuine. Across the stage, Daniel's shoulders sagged. Security finally guided him away from the microphone. He didn't look at me as they led him toward the exit. The doors closed behind him. The applause slowly faded. Ethan raised a hand. "Thank you," he said. The room settled again. "Tonight we correct a mistake." He turned back toward the screen. From this point forward, the platform previously known as the Mitchell Optimization System will officially be renamed the Harper Logistics Platform. A ripple of approval moved through the audience. Ethan continued. And beginning next year, the company will establish the Mark Harper Technology Scholarship. It will support engineering and nursing students across Ohio. That last part caught me off guard. Nursing. My throat tightened again. Ethan stepped away from the microphone. The speech portion of the evening ended soon after. Music resumed. Waiters returned with trays of drinks. Conversations slowly restarted. But the atmosphere had changed. People kept approaching my table. Some offered quiet congratulations. Others asked about Mark. One older executive shook my hand and said, "Your brother must have been one hell of an engineer." I smiled softly. He was. Eventually, the crowd thinned a little. Ethan walked back over and sat down across from me. For the first time since he arrived, the tension in his posture relaxed. "You handled that well," he said. "I'm not sure I did anything," I replied. "You stood up." "That seemed like the least I could do." He smiled. "I'm glad I finally found you." I studied him for a moment. "Why keep looking?" I asked. "It was one night in a hospital." Ethan shook his head. "It wasn't just one night." He leaned back in the chair. "When you're 24 years old and lying on a hospital bed wondering if you're about to die, you pay attention to the people around you." I listened quietly. "You were the only person in that building who treated me like I mattered," he said. "Most people were just doing their job." "So was I." He shook his head again. "No, you went beyond it." He glanced around the ballroom. "That kind of thing sticks with a person." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something unexpected. "What happened to your nursing career?" I hesitated. "Life happened." "Meaning? Marriage, family, Daniel's job moves?" I shrugged lightly. "Somewhere along the way, it just stopped." Ethan watched me for a long moment. "Well," he said finally, "life still has a funny way of circling back." "Seems like it." Across the room, the band had started playing a slower tune. Couples drifted toward the dance floor. Ethan stood. "I should probably make a few more rounds before the board members start wondering where I disappeared to." "That's probably wise." He extended his hand. It felt strange, shaking hands with someone whose face had appeared in business magazines for the last decade. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For that night." "You already thanked me." "Not properly." He started to walk away. Then paused. "Claire," he said. "Yes. I meant what I said earlier." "About what?" "Truth eventually catching up." He smiled. "Sometimes it just takes a little longer than we expect." Then he disappeared into the crowd. I stayed at the table for another few minutes watching the room. The same ballroom. The same people. But somehow everything felt different now. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I could breathe. The ballroom emptied slowly that night. Corporate galas always end the same way. The music fades, people collect their coats, conversations drift toward elevators and valet stands. Within an hour, the glitter and noise disappear like it was all temporary theater. I stepped outside into the cool Columbus night. The rain had stopped. Streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, and the air smelled clean in that quiet way it does after a storm. For a long time, I just stood there on the sidewalk. No husband beside me. No instructions about what to say or how to behave. Just silence. My phone buzzed in my purse. "Daniel." Of course. I let it ring. It rang again. Then again. Finally I answered. "Claire," he said immediately, his voice tight. "Where are you?" "Outside." "Don't leave, I'm coming back." I leaned against a metal railing near the entrance. "Why?" "Because we need to talk." A long pause hung between us. "Daniel," I said quietly, "I think we're past talking." "You don't mean that." "I think I do." His breathing grew heavier. "You embarrassed me tonight." That sentence landed in the air between us. For 25 years that had been the scale he measured everything with. Who embarrassed who? I almost laughed. "You stole my brother's work," I said calmly. "That's not what happened." "Then explain it." He hesitated. "It was complicated," he muttered. "Was it?" Silence. Then he tried a different approach. "Claire, we've built a life together." I looked out at the empty street. "You built a career," I replied. "Don't do this." "I'm not doing anything." "Where are you going to go?" he asked. The question sounded less like concern and more like calculation. I thought about it. Then I answered honestly. "I don't know yet." He scoffed. "You're being emotional." "No," I said. "For the first time in years, I'm not." Another long silence passed. Finally, he spoke again. "You'll regret this." I ended the call. The valet pulled my coat from the rack and handed it to me. "Good night, ma'am." "Good night." I walked 2 blocks before realizing I didn't actually know where I was headed. Then I remembered something. Austin had been the beginning. But Columbus had always been Mark's city. And suddenly I knew exactly where to go. The cemetery was quiet the next morning. Gray sky, cold wind, fallen leaves scattered across the grass. Mark's headstone sat beneath a tall oak tree near the edge of the grounds. I hadn't visited in a while. Life had a way of filling the calendar with smaller things until the important ones got pushed aside. I stood there for a few minutes before speaking. "Well," I said softly, "we finally fixed it." The wind moved through the branches above me. I smiled faintly. "You'd probably laugh about the whole thing." Mark always had that kind of humor. He once told me the best revenge in life was simple. Let the truth do the work. "I wish you'd been there last night," I said. "You would have enjoyed the look on Daniel's face." For the first time since the gala, a quiet sense of peace settled over me. The story that had been buried for years had finally surfaced. And somehow that felt right. The divorce process started 2 weeks later. Daniel fought it at first. Then he realized there wasn't much left to argue about. His position at the company was gone. Several other firms in the industry quickly decided they weren't interested in hiring someone connected to that kind of scandal. The house sold within 3 months. We divided what remained. 25 years of marriage reduced to paperwork and signatures. Strangely, the hardest part wasn't ending it. The hardest part was realizing how long I had been waiting for the courage to do it. One afternoon in early spring, I walked into a hospital again. Riverside Methodist, just north of downtown Columbus. The lobby smelled exactly the way hospitals always do. Clean, sharp, familiar. The volunteer desk receptionist smiled. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said. "I'm here to speak with HR. About a position. About coming back." A few weeks later, I found myself standing in an ER hallway again. Monitors beeped. Nurses moved quickly between rooms. A doctor called for lab results down the corridor. It felt like stepping back into a rhythm my body still remembered. I was older now. Slower in some ways. But the work still made sense. And for the first time in decades, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. A few months later, I met Ethan again. Not at a ballroom. Not at a company event. Just a quiet coffee shop in German Village. He arrived in a plain jacket and jeans. No entourage. No board members. Just a guy who once survived a bad night in a Texas emergency room. We talked about ordinary things. Hospitals. Travel. His daughter starting college. Eventually he asked, "How's the job?" I smiled. "Busy." "That's good." "It is." He took a sip of coffee. "I'm glad you went back." "So am I." For a moment we just sat there watching people pass outside the window. Then he said something that stuck with me. "You know," he said, "most people assume success changes your life." I waited. But sometimes, he continued, it just gives you the chance to return to who you were before everything got complicated. I thought about that for a second, then nodded. That sounds about right. We finished our coffee. No dramatic promises, no sudden romance. Just a quiet understanding between two people whose lives had crossed once and somehow found their way back again. These days my life is simpler. Night shifts. Coffee in the break room at 3 a.m. Long conversations with patients who can't sleep. Sometimes when the ER quiets down for a moment, I think about how strange life can be. One night in a hospital can echo across decades. A small decision can ripple outward in ways you never expect. And sometimes, the truth simply takes its time catching up. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that staying quiet for the sake of peace never really works. Eventually the truth finds its voice. And when it does, it can give you your life back. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who might need the reminder. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, you're always welcome to stay a while. Thank you for listening.